there for those who would like to partake. There were handouts, and I realized that I didn't make quite enough. So if you did not get the handouts, please give me your name or send me an email. I'm Stephen Miller, and or one way or another we'll get the hand copies to you on PDF. So as I said, my name is Stephen Miller. I'm a lecturer at the School of Information Studies here at UWM. And this is one of our series of lectures sponsored by our Information Organization Research Group, which, as its name implies, deals with topics related to cataloging, metadata, and those sorts of things. So we're very happy to have with us today Marjorie Bloss. Marjorie came up through the technical services ranks beginning as a serials cataloger. She's held positions in a variety of institutions, including libraries, namely the Rochester Institute of Technology, the Illinois Institute of Technology, and the Center for Research Libraries, as well as vendors, including OCLC and Endeavor, and consortia, including Rochester Research Library Council and the Center for Research Libraries and Illinois Carly. Marjorie has been active in a number of professional organizations, including LEX, IFLA, NISO, CONSORT, and she was the chair of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. So these are all very major national groups. In October 2005, Marjorie assumed the duties as RDA project manager, a position she held up until July 2005. So this topic is definitely something that Marjorie is well versed in, to say the least. Marjorie was a full-time lecturer also at Dominican University's Graduate School of Library and Information Science. And while she retired at the beginning of July of this year, she's still very much interested in and involved with RDA implementation. So with that, I'd like to ask everyone to please welcome Marjorie Bloss.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you also for shepherding me around and making sure that this, that, and the other are done. I have sort of been going through a memory lane situation in the last day or so, having lived in Shorewood when I was a kid, and I'm not going to tell you how many years ago. But needless to say, things have changed, but on the other hand, there still is a feeling to the neighborhood that I remember. So it's been a wonderful time. In any event, what I did want to talk about today, or divide this into three major topics for you. The first one was to give you a little bit of information about RDA's development and plans for its implementation. The second is to describe the foundation of RDA, and I know this is going to start to sound like alphabet soup. But in this case, FERBR, or Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records, and its sister or brother, FRAD, which is the Functional Requirements for Authority Data. And then the third part of what I want to do is to talk a little bit about some of the changes that you can expect to see in RDA when compared with the current cataloging code, Anglo-American Cataloging Rules, or AACR2. So let's start out talking a little bit about some of our cataloging traditions. As you can imagine, RDA is not the first cataloging code that we are encountering. Really, our written cataloging codes go back to the 1840s with Antonio Panizzi working at the British Library. The concept of cataloging codes, or documented cataloging codes, then crossed the ocean with Charles Jewett and Charles Cutter. And this has really gone all the way through the 1960s, when we have had a variety of cataloging codes. Some that were followed only within the United States, some that were followed by both the United States and the United Kingdom, some that were sort of followed by the United States and the United... So there's been a lot of history here of aiming toward one cataloging code that could be used by the Anglo community. Generally, because of the contradictions in existing cataloging codes, a man named Seymour Lebetsky developed what were known as the Paris Principles. And the Paris Principles were called as such because Lubetsky introduced them at an IFLA, International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions conference in Paris in 1961. And so if ever you see the referring to the Paris Principles, this is what people are talking about. And the Paris Principles really formed the basis for the first Anglo-American cataloging rules, and subsequently the second one, AACR2, the current cataloging rules that we now follow. So let's look at some of the characteristics of AACR2. It was issued in 1978, but not really adopted until 1981. And we were still very much in a card catalog environment at that stage of the game. And so that was really what AACR2 was written for, and where there are very huge reflections using this particular medium for cataloging information. As the basis for AACR2, something known as more alphabet soup, ISBD, or International Standard Bibliographic Control, was devised as the foundation for AACR2. And ISBD provided the rules both for the order of cataloging information. In other words, first you're going to have the title, and then a statement of responsibility, and then an addition statement, and then the place of publication, publisher, so on and so forth, as well as the punctuation that can be used for those rules. In many ways, I liken the first part of AACR2 to one of those style manuals that you use for creating a bibliography. In many ways, it's the same sort of thing, where you are given a prescribed order for the elements that comprise that bibliography. AACR2 also includes rules for establishing names of individuals, of persons, of corporate bodies, and of uniform titles. In other words, it will tell you, here is perhaps a variant form of the name, and here is how you establish an authorized form of the name. While it does talk about relationships, in other words, what is the relationship of a work in its original language to any ultimate translations, it does so only on a peripheral basis. You know, it says, okay, you acknowledge them, but there really isn't anything in AACR2 that says, this is how you connect them, this is how you connect the dots. In any event, in 1997, a group of international cataloging specialists met in Toronto and decided that because of all of the digital materials that were coming down the pike, the time had come to really re-examine AACR2 and see whether it was the best tool for what was needed for cataloging at that stage of the game. So the committee did meet, and it charged a group of people known as the Joint Steering Committee for Development of AACR with the responsibility of examining AACR2 and making revisions to it. And the JSC worked on all of this, and they came up with something that was known as AACR3. They put AACR3 out for a vote and asked people, what did you think of it? And when they got their comments from the circulating draft, people were saying, it's too much like AACR2. We are no longer in a book-only environment. We have to look out for other types of materials as well. Please go back to the drafting board and see what you can do. So in 2005, when the Joint Steering Committee met, they decided pretty much to jettison what they had been doing and begin at the beginning, looking at one document that was causing a lot of interest that had again come out of the IFLA community, known as the Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records. So before talking about that, let's talk just a little bit about who these folks are who are responsible for the cataloging rules, and this goes into AACR2, and now subsequently into RDA. Starting at the bottom of this slide, we have the members who are or comprise the Joint Steering Committee. We have representation from the American Library Association, specifically from cataloging and classification, description, and access. A representative from the Australian Committee on Cataloging, one person from the British Library, someone else from the Canadian Cataloging Committee, one person from CILIP, or the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, also coming out of the UK, and a representative from the Library of Congress. So these are the people who really do the nitty-gritty stuff, who write the rules, who look at what's going on in the cataloging community and saying, we need to revise this rule, we need to add this one, we need to eliminate that one. They then report to a group known as the Committee of Principals. And the COP generally has its parallel to representation from the Joint Steering Committee. However, you end up with the Australian group now represented by the National Library of Australia. You have CCC, or the Canadian Cataloging Committee, that is now represented at the National Archives or Library and Archives out of Canada. But again, there is a parallel structure here. Of course, doing all of this stuff comes with a price tag. And the money holders are the AACR fund or trustees, and these are the publishers, namely the American Library Association, the Canadian Library Association, and CILIP. So this is generally the three groups who are responsible for the creation of RDA. Obviously, they have different roles in this whole thing. As part of the work in 2005, in the spring of 2005, the JSC and the COP decided that they were going to have a project manager, and I was invited to apply and did, and the rest is history, I suppose. There was also an editor for RDA, and that was Tom Delsey. And there's also a secretary for the Joint Steering Committee. So in a way, this group was expanded for the initial writing of RDA. So let's look at some of the goals for RDA. First of all, they said that RDA will be a new standard for resource description and access. So if you did not catch the acronym for RDA previously, here it is, Resource Description and Access. There was also the decision that it was going to be designed for the digital world, and that it would be optimized for use as an online product. So even from its inception, RDA was envisioned as something that would be online. It was also seen as a description and access for all resources, all types of content, all types of media, which it's very true. AACR2 tried to do too, but it got left behind a bit with all of the variety of digital media that were springing up very quickly. Also, the feeling was that the resulting records would be usable in the digital environment, such as the internet, the web, and obviously OPACs. Other goals for RDA is that it would be consistent, flexible, and extensible. What does that mean? That it's not going to lock you into only one community, or basically the information will be able to be shared across different communities, and that it will be able to expand and grow as new technologies, new software, new trends are developed. There was also the intention that it would be compatible with international established principles, models, and standards. And this is something that is extremely important, and I'll talk about it a little more, that unlike AACR2, which came out in 1978, the world had expanded in one way, but also contracted in another. In other words, there were very many more information communities, but we suddenly discovered it was really important that we talk to one another, and that we share what was going on in one community with another community. And this is something that in the creation of RDA, we tried very, very hard to do. When we saw RDA being used primarily for libraries, we had also wanted it to be adaptable across many information communities worldwide. So this meant looking at other existing catalogs